Greetings and welcome to the Mount Rushmore podcast. My name is Jeff, and I'm joined as always by my good friends Richard.
Hello.
And Michael.
Howdy.
Richard and Michael like to debate and deliberate the Mount Rushmore of any given topic, and this week is no different when they debate the Mount Rushmore of, what is it, Richard?
Controversial angles in wrestling.
Okay, controversial.
Not counting Kurt Angle.
Not counting Kurt Angle.
Different angle.
All right. What is an angle in wrestling?
So it's basically it's basically a storyline. So
Okay.
This is not necessarily when something happened in a wrestling match that was not planned. So something unfortunate like Owen Hart falling to his death isn't necessarily an angle, it's something that happened.
Okay.
But a storyline that wound up getting out of control or having a really either negative reaction or really people had a really strong reaction to it, that would fall within this, I think, within this world.
Okay, cool. So normally Richard and Michael oppose each other, but they, like a good tag team, are joining their strength to take on a foe, and that foe is actually a friend of mine and a really funny guy, James Walker. How are you doing, James?
I'm good, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Good. Thanks for being on the show. You have a vast experience as a graphic designer and have worked on publications, and you worked on a wrestling publication. What was it?
I was at WWE Magazine for a couple years. They were trying to go the lad mag route, trying to match up with Maxim and that kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. So they were bringing in all sorts of designers, people from different backgrounds, and it was fun sort of being in Titan Tower in Stamford, Connecticut, and as dumb as it sounds, you would bump into wrestlers in the hallway. And it was great. Saw Vince a couple times, and you don't forget that. He is every bit as ridiculous in person as he is on television. He really walks like that. And
what, James, I have one question. What is Vince's favorite font? And why is it Comic Sans?
Oh, God. Yeah. No, I mean, I can't say fonts, but I know that the color teal has been synonymous with wrestling and Vince for a long time. Side note, teal. It's like that sort of off green, blue. Roddy Piper's daughter wrestles under the name Teal Piper because of that. It's a big wrestling color. If you look at old 80s wrestling, every other wrestler has teal on their tights or cape or whatever.
So can I ask you, when you were there, if I work for an entertainment company symbolized by a mouse, and I can't say that I'm a huge fan of everything that they've ever produced, but were your coworkers all big fans of the entertainment that you were talking about?
It was split. I mean, there were diehards, but for the most part, the crew I worked with took it very ironically. You know what I mean? Like we had TVs on everywhere playing wrestling all the time, and it got to a point where, you had your favorite thing, but it was normally because it was something pretty ridiculous. So I've always gravitated towards the weird stuff in wrestling anyways, the odder storylines. So it was great for me.
Okay. Well, speaking of odd storylines and speaking of controversial works, I am going to be deposed as a referee. Coming online right now, we have my good buddy Eddie Firth, who is among many things, a stand-up comic and a experienced and seasoned wrestling referee. How are you doing, Eddie?
Hey, Jeff, how's it going, man? Pretty good. How's everything by you?
Pretty good. Eddie, online we have Richard Manfredi and Michael Winfield and James Walker. They are good buddies. Michael and Richard are the co-hosts of the co-producers of the Mount Rushmore podcast, and they normally compete against each other. But today, Richard and Michael are going to be on one team, and James is going to be on another team, and they are going to each choose their Mount Rushmore, alternating back and forth. And Eddie, you are going to be the ultimate judge about who makes the best choice or who makes supports their decision the best. I'll still act as moderator, but you're going to chime in at any and all times that you feel like it. Eddie, could you tell us a little bit about what it's like to work in the milieu of wrestling?
It's one of my favorite things that I get to do. I grew up a wrestling fan. Are you guys all wrestling fans?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So I grew up watching it since I was 5 years old. I was not big enough to ever compete, but when I got the opportunity to start refereeing, I mean, I just enjoyed being around the business when I was starting to get involved, when they actually put me in the ring and I could interact with the wrestlers and I was part of the story and everything. It's so much fun. You're going out there with some of your good friends, people you respect and enjoy, while they put on a live stunt show right in front of you. It's awesome.
Cool. So Eddie is going to jump in, and he's going to ultimately make the picks at the end, but I'm going to hang in as moderator, keep things moving.
It's Jeff Hopkins, Jeff the Body Hopkins.
Yes.
Abdicated all of his responsibility in the ring, just sitting outside and commentating and calling us knuckleheads.
If they thought I was lazy before.
Yeah, you're just in the gorilla position, just overlooking everything.
That's right. Okay, so our guest always goes first. James Walker, what is your first choice for the Mount Rushmore of controversial wrestling angles?
Okay, my first choice is the Big Boss Man feeds Al Snow his own dog.
That's a great choice.
So they were feuding at the time. Big Boss Man, Ray Traylor, who was a prison guard themed wrestler, and Al Snow, who was sort of that up and coming hardcore style that they pushed a lot in the Attitude Era. And Al Snow had a mannequin head that he walked around with, and he used to shake it at everybody. And he lost that and replaced it with a small Chihuahua. Well, they're all small, I guess. A Chihuahua named Pepper that he loved. And 1 week, Pepper turned up missing, and he was distraught about this. And he was cutting these promos. Where's my dog? I want my dog back. Eventually, he started to get ransom notes from the Big Boss Man saying, if you want your dog back, we got to have a hardcore championship match. I want that belt. And they had the belt. Al Snow won, and the Big Boss Man took the dog anyways and left. He said, next week, he said, he appeared on the Titantron or something like that. And he said, if you want your dog, no funny business, come to my hotel room. And I'll give you your dog back. And so he went by himself for whatever reason. And, the guy's been trying to kill him for weeks. So he just goes and meets him in his hotel room. And he's like, all right, where's my dog? I want my dog. And he's like, well, your dog's at the groomer getting cleaned up right now. But I want you to sit down and have some of this food. I prepared best food in town. Just have a seat. Your dog will be here any minute. And he just kept pushing him to eat the food. He eats it. It's Chinese food. It's pepper steak.
Of course it's Chinese food, yes.
Yeah, right. Because they had to throw a little bit of racism in with the animal cruelty. But it was also, Lawler could make a joke about pepper steak later, too.
Naturally.
But, right. Because, yeah. So he eats it, and then he's like, all right, where's my dog? I ate your stupid food. Where's my dog? And he's like, you ate your dog. You ate your dog. That was Pepper. And so Al Snow throws up. They have a little bit of a fight. And you think that it's all over then, right? Because the Big Boss Man has won. But it's not. It culminates in what is one of the most ridiculous spectacles ever, a fight called a Hell in a Kennel match, in which they have in addition to the regular steel cage around the ring, they also set up the Hell in a Cell. So it's the ring, cage, a moat, if you will, and then the cell. And into that, they are going to load in all of these quote-unquote vicious dogs. So the night of the pay-per-view happens, or I think it was a pay-per-view, these dogs come out, and it's Dobermans and, pit bulls, the usual, suspects. And they're all led out by, like, these animal handlers, so it looks pretty legit. But the dogs were the most docile. There was not a bark. There was not a growl. They were not dangerous at all. They ended up going to the bathroom all over the place because I think they were probably scared too. And then the whole match was like all of this forced danger where like, one of them would be dangling over a dog, so it looked like they're almost about to get bit, but the dogs didn't care, so it just looked stupid.
Dog starts just licking their face at some point.
Luckily, it was only their faces that they were licking, because so
I can't believe the dogs didn't sell for anybody.
Well, they were WCW fans, I think, maybe. So eventually Al gets head back. So the story actually does go full circle, and he ends up winning with the help of his mannequin head and forgetting about the fact that he ate his dog. Like it's just gone after that. But the Big Boss Man made Al Snow eat his own dog. That's my first pick.
When was that?
That's an incredible story.
That was the Attitude Era of the 90s.
Okay.
When they were doing anything and everything to get ratings. And the Big Boss Man was ridiculous.
The Attitude Era, the one that all the smarks say is the best era ever.
Oh, they're wrong.
No, it's absurd. And
Okay.
look, the Rock in Austin is great in the Attitude Era. Everything else is no good.
Right.
All right, Winfield and Manfredi, what are you coming out with?
Well,
Michael,
yeah.
I believe you should go first since we have a Big Boss Man pick as well.
Sure. Well, our first pick is the Big Boss Man versus the Big Show, just in casket nonsense.
I have that on my list as well.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
All right.
I was so delighted to hear Big Boss Man's name came up before, and I did not know that other storyline. So this is just incredible. But I guess he has a penchant for just being just a bad dude. I mean, his entire character before he kind of got dudded out in, SWAT gear he was just like a former corrections officer, which I think he was in real life. And, he was just this very large man in a very sweaty light blue kind of police outfit out of something that like the Dukes of Hazzard, the Duke brothers would get chased around by. But at some point in 1999 during this Attitude Era, he got involved in a feud with the Big Show, who was like the current giant at the time. And I guess he's still the current giant. I don't know if there's anyone that has kind of surpassed him.
Braun Strowman.
Okay, there you go.
Braun
I'm not as up to date
Big
on.
Show currently plays himself on a Netflix sitcom.
Oh, well, there you go.
So yeah.
Oh, he's doing well for himself.
They'll give anybody a Netflix show.
Well, within the storyline, the Big Show's father had passed away. I don't know why.
That had happened in real life, by the way, as well.
Oh, it had.
Yeah.
I read that it had. I read that his dad was still alive at the time, but maybe I read an old article. So it just goes to show that these people are unscrupulous in what they'll use to try to sell a wrestling match. So the Big Show's father had passed, and at the funeral, the Big Show is standing around in black leather jacket, and up rolls the Big Boss Man in a car that looks like it's out of like the Blues Brothers, which is like an old police car with this giant megaphone or loudspeaker on top, and he starts berating the Big Show. I don't really know why. Did he just hate him? I mean, I guess everybody just hated each other because of wrestling. Richard?
I was going to say, I cannot understate how big this megaphone is, the speaker that he's got on his car. It's roughly the size of his car.
And watch the Blues Brothers if you want to see what it looks like. I mean, it's...
Basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he starts berating him and insulting him and knocks him down with the car, and then takes, an extended period of time to chain up the casket of his father to this car, and then drags it through the cemetery with the Big Show leaping on top of and rolling off of, and it's just ridiculous and violent and unnecessary. Flash forward a few weeks, a few months, I don't know how long these feuds go, and the big boss man is invading the home of the Big Show's
so glad you have
mother.
this part too. Yeah.
You're sure it's a two. You got to have the 3 parts to any good story, including the actual wrestling match where people are just clobbered. And he invades the home of the Big Show's mother and just berates her into I guess, divulging some information that the Big Show is an illegitimate child. And of course, that is, one step too far, and it leads to a match at Armageddon, where the 2 giant sweaty men smash into each other for a little bit. And it should be noted that, like you said, Big Boss Man was the hardcore champion at the time, and this was for like the fill in the blank biggest wrestling championship, the the WWE championship or the heavyweight champion. I don't know which one it was. It was one of them.
I don't even remember
course,
the match. I just remember the other stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and then that's the whole point, is that the wrestling doesn't matter. It's all the nonsense around it. And the Big Show eventually beats him down and wins. And I guess they just go back to work together.
His father comes back to life.
Yeah, okay, there you go.
James, why did you choose this one? Sorry, Eddie, go ahead.
I mean, because it's just so ridiculous. It's the Blues Brothers car. It's the visual of the Big Show being dragged away on the back of the casket, and it's the last thing that happens in that home invasion. He gets right in the camera, and because he's been making fun of the Big Show for having a dead dad, because that's laughable. And now he's quote unquote.
Yes, it is.
So now he's saying. He gets in the camera, hits him right here. You're nothing but a nasty bastard. That's 10 times worse than having a dead daddy. I'll never forget that delivery. It was great. Great trailer. Rest in peace.
A little joke from Eddie Firth when we commented on the Big Show having a show on Netflix. Eddie is one of the creators of the Historical Roasts, which is a Netflix show hosted by the Roastmaster General Jeff Ross, if I believe.
Again, they'll literally give anyone a show.
Well, that's a great show, and very theatrical, and probably it almost seems like one kind of aspect of your love of the big storytelling that happens in the milieu of wrestling is also played out in Historical Roasts. Would you mind describing that show to our listeners, Eddie?
So Historical Roast is a classic celebrity-style honoree roast, except every one of the characters is a dead, historically based character. Mm-hmm. So we roast Abraham Lincoln, we roast Anne Frank during World War II, we roast Martin Luther King Jr. We just any dead historical figure is put on the hot seat, and a bunch of their friends and colleagues roast them.
Yes, and back when the world was normal, that show was happening still as a live comedy show at the Comedy Store. Is that right?
Yeah, Wednesday evenings, once a month, we would roast somebody at the Comedy Store. We've got a couple ready. As soon as we can open back up and get back to it, we'd love to roast COVID-19.
I was gonna say I can't wait for you guys to get that bastard Louis Pasteur. Get with him.
So
we've roasted Macho Man Randy Savage. We've roasted Andre the Giant, the Ultimate Warrior. We've done them at the Comedy Store and at Meltdown when we were there.
So far, we're not quite at our halftime, but Eddie, what do you think of the commentary so far? Are these guys revealing what they know or don't know about how an angle is created or what it needs to work? Or get over.
I mean, they're definitely hitting all the aspects that are important to each one of the storylines. They're hitting the major topics, what really happened. Very well versed. They could add some flair to it. Right now we're strictly reading facts. But remember, this is a business of show.
Right.
Make me feel what's going on. Don't just tell me what's going on. Make me feel what's going on. I wanted to be in the room when Al Snow ate Pepper. I wanted to be in
the casket.
Graveyard. Yeah. I wanted to if you could have put me in the casket, that would have been. I was going to say I just wanted to be at the cemetery, but now you see that's what I'm looking for. If we're almost, how many more are we listing?
Oh, well, we've got, looks like we've got one more from Michael and Richard because, James, you had the same one, the Big Boss Man, Big Show, Casket Heist. So am I right that
Yes.
Michael and Richard will do another one, then we'll be at our halftime?
Absolutely, and
Okay.
I will jump in and take this one.
Okay.
So it is 1996, and the two main wrestling promotions are WWF and WCW, but there is a third upstart wrestling promotion that's just a little bit more extreme. I'm talking, of course, about ECW, and they were owned by Paul Heyman, and they were known for doing wrestling angles that maybe the other promotions would think were a little too shocking or a little bit too hardcore. And I'll set the stage. There are two main players in this. One of them is the Sandman, who I think you could best say is the very sleazy version of Stone Cold Steve Austin. Someone who basically comes to the ring drinks beers during his matches, smokes cigarettes during his matches, is basically this hardcore sleazo type guy. He's the good guy in this thing, by the way. He is pitted against a wrestler named Raven, who basically is if Eddie Vedder led a cult. That's what Raven would be.
Yeah.
And they have a series of matches where Raven, as part of his cult, which I think was called the Flock at the time, indoctrinates Sandman's ex-wife and also his 8-year-old son.
Oh, wow.
So they have a
God,
series.
it's all this family drama is really dominating the controversial wrestling take so far.
Yeah, it's interesting that they tend to. It's almost like wrestlers have family issues. Strange. They get to a match where Raven and Sandman have this, blow off. You think it's going to blow off the feud. Raven's son helps Sandman. You think, Sandman's son helps Sandman. My mistake. And you think that everything's going to be patched back up. And then Sandman's kid goes and blasts him right in the nuts. This is not the controversial part. The controversial part is when Raven, along with two of his cronies, Blue Meanie and Stevie Richards, go under the ring and pull out barbed wire and a crucifix and proceed to place Sandman on said crucifix, wrap barbed wire around his head, and then parade him out of the ring and out to the back.
Oh, wow. So
That's the angle.
A biblical crucifixion, or
it was a crucifixion. The crucifixion of Sandman is what this has been come to be known as. And the ECW wrestling fans were known for being kind of more. There's based in Philly. There's a very Philly type crowd. So if you can imagine what everything that entails, even they basically decided this was a bridge too far for them and started booing, and not in that sort of I hate you wrestler because you're playing bad guy angle. More in the we're a bunch of Catholics here and we're going to riot. And the interesting part is that Kurt Angle had made an appearance that night. They were trying to sign him. He had just won the Olympic gold medal in the 96 Olympics. And they were trying to sign him to do an angle with one of their wrestlers, Taz. So they had him come out and do something in the ring and do some commentary. Kurt Angle's also very religious. And when he saw this angle taking place, he just starts screaming at Paul Heyman about, did you know about this? And if my name is associated with this in any way, I'm going to sue you until you're broke and da-da-da-da-da. And Paul Heyman basically goes, oh, I didn't know anything about this. They did this on their own, which is complete bullshit. But he forces Raven to then have to come back out to the crowd, break character, and read this very insincere-sounding apology that if anyone was offended by their use of religious iconography, he apologizes for it, which just does just enough to stop the riot, but becomes this thing where it's, I think, in the future, we sort of had the answer to the question is what's too far in a wrestling angle? Oh, yes, crucifixion. That might be. Oh, wait, hold on a second. But I was just going to say, but wait a second. Turns out that's not the case because a couple of years later, during the Attitude Era, Undertaker winds up crucifying Stone Cold Steve Austin during an episode of Raw. And Stephanie.
Yeah,
I think
and Vince would never admit it was a cross. He would only say it's a symbol. And that's not a cross. It's the Undertaker symbol. Ugh. So
I think the difference was the crown of thorns. I think that's when it gets a little bit, that's when it goes a bit of a bridge too far. But yeah, I mean, Vince McMahon also is somebody who booked himself to go over on God in a tag team match at one point. So maybe he's not the best judge of what's appropriate and not. But yeah, this is one time where the most extreme of all wrestling organizations took it too far.
And after that, as soon as when the audience was streaming out of the auditorium, when Tori Amos's "Crucify" was being played, that it was just a bad choice.
Poor timing, yeah.
It's just poor timing. It was just on a playlist. It was just going. You should have waited until I guess Caught a Light Sneeze started playing. I don't know.
All right, so we are at our halftime. Eddie, what would you be thinking normally if this were a wrestling match, if this were kind of a break in between? Is there something you as a ref, what's going through your mind at this point?
Well, halfway through the match, if we were right here, I would whisper to one of the guys, we need to pick this up, because I don't feel like we're giving the crowd what they want right now. We've got some very interesting choices for the Mount Rushmore of controversial storylines, and some of the most important and obvious are not out there yet.
Okay, all right.
So let's give the crowd what they want. If we're going to go home strong, they need to see the high spots, fellas.
Okay, well, I'm going to reserve. I'm now moderator. I'm not judge. Eddie, at the end of all this, might be counting on you to hit some of those highlights. Sometimes these guys get kind of become hipsters and kind of want to do the cool deep cuts.
Yeah.
Yeah, and let's go right into the second half. Let's go with James Walker. What's your third choice?
Well, you said you wanted some flair, so this story takes place on the set of a mock talk show they used to do on WCW that was built to look like Ric Flair's, I guess, living room, like this big. It was like very Georgian, very Southern, rattan furniture and the whole thing. Furniture they never used because Ric Flair never sat down. There was a French maid that would walk around behind him to make it look like we're actually in his home, even though there's a studio audience. So they're getting ready for War Games, which is teams of three fighting. And he has on his show that day the team of Sting, old school Sting with the face paint and the fun surfer Sting, and the British Bulldog, and who did not get, I don't think, that it was a talk show because he stands with his back to the camera for like the whole time. And they get in, they're talking about War Games, and they have an announcement, and then out comes Psycho Sid along with Harlem Heat, because they're the heel team for War Games. And, in classic WCW style, everyone steps on everyone else's line. No one knows what's going on. Sid's trying to he's just got to get to the question, who's your partner, kind of a thing. He eventually gets to it, and Sting delivers his line, which is, you're not ready for, our team, because it's literally going to shock you. At which point, the camera pans over to this wall of just drywall in that doesn't match the rest of Ric Flair's house. It cuts over this sheet of drywall that explodes as standing behind it is a wrestler by the name of Fred Ottman, who you might know as Tugboat, who's like a Hulk Hogan protege in WWF. He also was Typhoon, remember the natural disasters. Big dude. So he's standing there, and check out this outfit. So he's shirtless. He's wearing a duster with no sleeves that just looks like it's made out of old tires, jeans, no belt, cowboy boots. On his head, a stormtrooper helmet that's been spray painted silver and sparkly, like glitter. He's supposed to bust through the wall and come out and announce himself. Now, before they taped the segment, someone as the story goes, someone backstage noticed that the drywall wasn't too sturdy because it only had wood on 3 sides because you're supposed to bust through it. This guy, being a diligent union contractor, probably put an extra strip of 2x4 along the bottom to make a square to make it sturdy. So when the Shockmaster busts through the door, he didn't know it was there. He couldn't see anything because he's wearing this big dumb helmet. He trips over the 2x4, goes down like a sack of Fred Ottman, and the helmet flies off his head. So he's scrambling to get the helmet. You hear over the PA system someone trying not to laugh because he also couldn't talk in that helmet. So all of his lines were going to be voiced over like a Dalek or something. He was just going to move his head like while they talk. The guy up in the booth was like, because he fell and his helmet came off and he looked really stupid. Finally gets it back on. They give the whole speech about, I am the Shockmaster and I've come to shock WCW. This is not property of George Lucas at all. Don't sue us. And, it's all like this big baritone thing. He makes lightning fly. And they cut to like Sid looking, he's supposed to look scared, but he just kind of looks annoyed that it's gone so poorly. Ric Flair at this point has left to the fake balcony of his fake house with the fake maid to do Ric Flair stuff. And that's it. And so the Shockmaster shows up at the War Games. I don't think he keeps the helmet on. I can't remember if he wrestles in the helmet. I doubt it. And quickly sort of fades away.
As Elizabeth says, aren't you a little short for a Shockmaster?
Yeah. Not unlike, it's reminiscent of the gobbledygooker, which was the giant turkey that WWF had come out of an egg at Survivor Series.
At least that chicken didn't trip.
Well, of course not. It was Hector Guerrero.
Yeah.
Fucking the bird stayed on its feet.
The bird danced with Finkel, and then he did some flips in the. I mean, it's Hector Guerrero. He's a wrestling legend.
He's over. It worked.
Yeah.
I still want the gobbledygooker now.
He's come back a couple. You know what? You're right, because the Gooker's come back a couple times.
Yeah.
For like gimmick matches and stuff. But
he's over.
What is the name of the turkey? What was the name?
The gobbledygooker.
The gobbledygooker.
Tell me about the gobbledygooker.
It was the same kind of thing where they teased it forever. They had this giant egg that would sit next to the ring, and every week, me and Gene would talk about how he didn't know what was in the egg and who was going to come out of it. And at the time, I was too young to like look into dirt sheets or wrestling rumors, but I've heard tell since that people suspected every independent free agent wrestler was going to come out of that egg. Like they were like, oh, maybe Ric Flair is going to join WWF and all this stuff. And the result was very disappointing to a lot of people.
Here, Jeff, you'll appreciate this. It was for Survivor Series, I believe.
Yeah.
And the Survivor Series is the annual show that takes place in and around Thanksgiving.
This was on Thanksgiving Day. Yeah.
Oh, there you go. You want to spend time with your family watching wrestling, and then a giant man in a turkey costume emerge from an egg and dance the hokey pokey. Which dance was it that he danced with Mean Gene? Turkey in the straw.
That Survivor Series, incidentally, was the premiere or the arrival of The Undertaker in the WWF. That was his first. Luckily, he didn't come out of the egg. I don't know if that was.
There's rumors that he was supposed to come out of the egg. Yeah, he was one of the options for what was going to come out of the egg. The Undertaker.
Yeah.
21-1 at WrestleMania, my ass.
Well, you got a turkey and a goat, so there you go.
Okay, dudes. All right, let's move on to the third choice from Richard and Michael.
So I'll go next. And I guess, my current state of following storylines with the WWE specifically kind of fell apart about, 5, 6, 7 years ago. So all my stuff is just rooted in like the Attitude Era. And one of the first things I thought of when Richard and I were kind of throwing around ideas was when the stable of wrestlers known as Degeneration X came to the ring to mock the stable of wrestlers known as the Nation of Domination. Is that right? Did I get that right?
Yeah, you got it right.
Thank you. And they came out dressed in blackface in like 1998 or 1999. And like, I don't know, is there ever a good time to do that? And I think the answer is no. And you just think about, and it was just like, they did it one time, but the one time of like the mischief makers, like they were, Jeff, to bring you up to speed. So there was a group of wrestlers called Degeneration X, and they were kind of like
they're the bad boys.
I was going to say the dicks of the of like the wrestling world at the time. They were anti-authority. They had no respect for, fill in the blank, whatever you want to fill in the blank for. They did a lot of crotch chopping with their hands and, as they all do, beat people up. The Nation of Domination was a group of wrestlers who was the like black militant, also kind of anti-authority, but at the time they were led by The Rock, who was on the verge of turning from heel to babyface. And, when you come out and you're dressed in spray tan and you're dressed in afro rigs and some people just flat out shoe polish on your face, mocking people, it's not a good look for really anybody. It's not a good look for the people that you are mocking as well, that are these gigantic men that you just accept that this is what it is. Yeah. And they're like the people that were kind of in charge at the time too, or at least Triple H, super buddy with Vince McMahon. I don't know if he was then engaged to Vince's daughter or if that was later on. But it's just don't ever do that. And I think they did that once, and it feels like enough to like have soiled. Like if Bart Simpson was ever to have come out wearing blackface, you'd be like, okay, I'm 100% turned off on Bart Simpson. I understand he is like the mischievous, trickster character within The Simpsons. Yeah. But when you go a step too far and you're grown men doing it, it's just like
Hank Azaria.
It's just disgusting.
Like Hank Azaria.
So it seems like the transgression is a theme with you. I'll leave this up to the ref to determine, but ref, right now we've got them talking about crossing a line, and I'm kind of interested in that in life. You want to be bold, you want to do something big, you want to really get over, and so you're going to try to do something nobody's seen before. They're taking a risk. Is there a way to calculate that risk in terms of not being offensive, in terms of like racial or religious iconography? Do you have an opinion about that?
I think we as a culture and society always decide when and where that line is. It's an ever moving line. And I don't think you really understand where the line is until you cross it. You can't, at some point the line is crossed. That's what somebody is saying, is that no longer feels like a comfortable area of discussion or what have you.
And we're definitely looking back on it 20 years later and saying like, oh, maybe at the time it was fine. I'd say a good line to see whether something is well received or not, or appropriate, is whether Jerry the King Lawler is applauding it or not. Yeah. And if he is like super in favor of it, just be like, oh no, whatever the other side of that is, that's where we should be. If it's a little too gratuitous and awful treatment of women, or if it's just blatantly mocking your black employees.
One of the things I constantly argue about pro wrestling is that it was never as good as we thought it was.
Oh yeah.
So it's never, the storylines we have some fictional imagination because we were kids. We liked it when we were kids, and a kid isn't nearly as discerning, and everything that surrounds us makes it wonderful and fantastic and amazing. And then we get to be older and we yell at wrestling and say, how come you don't make me feel like a kid anymore? Because we changed, but the matches were never any good. The people were never any good. The stories were all terrible. Like, whatever your first thing that you liked in wrestling was not a masterpiece. It was a piece of shit that you were just like, holy shit, this is the coolest fucking thing ever. And then we changed. Then we're like, boo Roman Reigns. Like, get the fuck out of here. If I was 9 years old, I'd love Roman Reigns. His name was Kevin Nash, but he wasn't, but he's more athletic. Like Roman can move. The fuck out of here.
It's also a case of them not learning the lesson over time. Because about maybe 10 years before DX did that, Roddy Piper did half blackface.
Yeah.
His entire body. And, he still talked, well, not today, but he would talk about regretting it in the years that followed. But no one learned the lesson from that. And DX came out in full blackface. So
I could, yeah.
So James,
that seemed way after the time too.
Yeah.
We're talking about the big promotions. Eddie and James, do you guys have any local shows to LA or to other regions that you like to go to? James introduced me to bar wrestling, and I know you're a fan of wrestling pro wrestling. Either of you?
I mean, I started working out here with Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, which is always awesome. Wow, Women of Wrestling does their tapings here, and I'm always with them. Recently, we actually put on a pro wrestling show at the Comedy Store, and we're looking to try to do that again. But we had David Arquette.
Dan Black thing or no? Something different. Never mind. Sorry, that was
no, I don't think so. No.
Yeah.
No, but right in the middle of the Comedy Store, we put on a wrestling show in November. So always go find local pro wrestling. And I think pro wrestling, much like stand-up comedy, is one of those art forms that you should be in the room if you can be. So anytime you can see pro wrestling live, wherever it is, whenever it is, it's a much better medium in person than it is. Even, with the Store Horseman, the podcast I do out of the Comedy Store, we talk wrestling. I started to become a part of that because we would do big watch-alongs for the pay-per-views in the belly room. And it was a free event and everyone came and ordered drinks and you'd have people who listen to the podcast come by. And I was just like, it's even watching the stream live with people, it was just such a better energy. So always go see pro wrestling live if you can.
Richard and I had gone to a number of PWG shows here in the Valley. And what I remembered when we first saw it and what I appreciated was the people that were there were in on the reality of it. Mm-hmm. And it delved so much into comedy. It delved so much into people just buying in whatever was going on within the ring or just before the ring and outside. It was amazing the difference between how seriously, WWE takes it versus the people that are actually doing it and, having matches where, you're deathly afraid of stepping on Legos. And you're just like, these are people that are doing it, that get it, whether it's a more local thing, whether it was a very different experience when you're jammed in with a couple hundred people, breaking the fire marshal code. And you're just like, okay, this is a different sort of experience versus, you're watching it on TV and you see the specific angles that the TV producers want you to see. Local wrestling's great.
Yeah, I can't wait till we get it back.
James Walker, this is your fourth and final choice. What do you want to tell us about?
It didn't make my list, but it's interesting. You brought up David Arquette. Him winning the championship probably should have made my list, but he's so good.
Arquette just win the world title.
I'll tell you what, though. I got a chance to see him at bar wrestling. He's amazing now. I loved it, but that's not on my list. My fourth or third or wherever we are. So there was a thing going around this is the Attitude Era still, again, sorry, where all of the wrestlers think they're legitimate tough guys in addition to being fake TV tough guys. So they got it in their heads, creative or whoever, or Vince or Russo or whoever, to do something called a Brawl for All tournament, which was going to bring real fighting into the WWE. The problem with that is once you say this fighting's going to be real, everyone starts asking, well, what's all this other fighting that you're making us buy every week as real fighting? What's the line, right? And added to which, they had a plan for who was going to win the Brawl for All tournament. So even though they were purporting it as the first real fighting in WWF, they still wanted to game the system. And they had chosen Dr. Death Steve Williams to be their winner because we're going to give him a big push. He's a legitimate badass. He's going to come out of the Brawl for All. He's going to knock everyone senseless. It's going to be great. He's going to be our new guy. In the first round, he faced Bart Gunn and tore, I believe it was a hamstring pull or something like that. Hurt himself. Bart Gunn knocked him out, and they suddenly had no idea what they were going to do for the rest of the thing. But they had planned it over a course of I think 4 weeks leading up to a pay-per-view of all these matches, and it was all the real quote unquote bad guys or tough guys. So it was like Battle of the Tough Guys from No Holds Barred. Familiar? Anyway. Yeah. That seminal work. So it was Shamrock and Billy Gunn and Dr. Death and Mark Marrow. Both Road Warriors were in there. The Godfather, Salvio Vega. All these guys that purported to be really tough. And they had to sort of hobble through it. There were multiple injuries. People were getting hurt left and right. Nobody liked watching it. They couldn't time it for TV because it was real, but it was also on a point system, but there was also no time limit. So it was just this real head scratcher that went on forever. And eventually Bart Gunn, who took out Steve Williams, won the whole thing. And so you would think, well, he's going to get the push that they were going to give Steve Williams. They didn't give him any push at all. You probably know his brother better, Billy Gunn. Badass Billy Gunn, who was a member of DX. Bart Gunn then showed up they did another Brawl for All, and it wasn't a tournament this time. It was just him versus professional boxer Butterbean. I don't know if you guys know Butterbean.
Oh, yeah.
Once saw me eat a sheet cake on the Arsenio Hall show. It was great. The whole thing in between commercial breaks. And so they were going to have a real boxing match. And Butterbean knocked him out in seconds. And that was it. You never heard of it again. They never did it again. I think everyone agrees it was a dumb idea. And those lines need to not be blurred between real and fake because people start to notice.
Yeah, it was a bad idea, poorly executed.
Yeah.
Because if your idea is to get Dr. Death Williams over, just fake the fights. Have him tap guys out.
Yeah, don't put your talent in danger.
Yeah, well, beyond that, yeah. Bob Hawley talks about this, and I've read the interviews with him because he was one of the guys who was involved in it, and he actually said a lot of guys wanted to get involved in the start because you made extra money for being involved in it. There was a financial reward for winning this thing.
Right.
But it became evident pretty quickly that getting yourself hurt was not worth the extra $5,000 or whatever you made for winning a bout in this thing.
Okay, so if we're tracking at home, James Walker has chosen Big Boss Man and Al Snow, Big Boss Man and the Big Show Casket Heist / Home Invasion, Ric Flair with the Shockmaster, and Brawl for All, Bart Gunn. And now Richard and Michael are going to enter their last choice for the Mount Rushmore.
All right, you mentioned Ric Flair. And, everyone knows and loves Ric Flair, the nature boy. Kiss stealing, wheeling dealing, just all that stuff. What's great to see is Ric Flair have a heart attack in the middle of the ring, which is exactly what WCW brought to us back in 1998. So to set the stage, it's 1998. WCW is starting to fall apart, frankly. All of the stars have creative control. Everybody is, egos are running amok. Ric Flair at one point misses a TV taping to go watch his son in a high school wrestling tournament. And Eric Bischoff, who is not only the on-air head of the NWO, but is also the guy who is running everything behind the scenes, gets pissed off at Flair and in real life tries to sue him because of this. So they think, well, let's turn this into an angle because everyone is interested in the backstage machinations of wrestling politics in 1998. So this becomes a feud between Flair and Bischoff. And at one point, Flair gets in the ring and he cuts this promo on Bischoff. And it's actually a really good Ric Flair promo. And he's ranting and he's getting beat red in the face and he's wooing all over the place and he's dropping his elbows on his jacket, doing the whole 9 yards. They get done with the interview. Gene Okerlund is getting ready to throw it to a commercial when Ric Flair collapses in the corner, grasping his left arm. They then proceed to show the whole thing where they have people coming from the back, like Arn Anderson and J.J. Dillon and David Crockett, for God's sakes, they found somewhere, all out there to tend to him, as the announcers are basically saying, oh, well, maybe he hurt his shoulder when he dropped his elbow on his jacket. But then they start going into the very serious, this is not part of the wrestling, this is something very serious that has happened, boys. And they cart him away in a stretcher and take him off in an ambulance. About a half hour later, Eric Bischoff comes out and he's not dressed in his usual wrestling kind of slick garb. He's got like a pullover on and he's wearing glasses to come out and say that Ric Flair's had a mild heart attack and there are certain things in wrestling that are real and certain things that are not, and we hope that everything is going to be okay. And that is literally where they leave the angle for the week. So of course, they're going to build off of this and obviously they're going to use this as a platform for some bigger thing. Of course they didn't. It's WCW. It's 1998. All they did was the next week they had Flair come out and say that he had actually been poisoned by Eric Bischoff. Because they needed to retcon it because the reaction to it was so negative that they're like, how do we fucking fix this? Oh yeah, he was poisoned. That's how they fixed it. Heart attack angles never work in wrestling. They did a few years before that. Fritz von Erich in Texas, they did a heart attack angle with him. And it never works. I mean, we're willing to accept somebody getting bashed on the head with a steel chair 20 times in a row or falling off the top of a Hell in a Cell ring. But we're not willing to accept actual injuries that feel like they are real injuries. Uh-huh. It's like our suspension of disbelief gets all fucked up whenever something like this happens.
Lawler had a real one, didn't he?
Yeah, he did while he was commentating, and poor Michael Cole had to keep commentating on the match as they are giving CPR to Jerry Lawler right next to him on the ringside. Like I said, I don't know that they would do an angle like this post Owen Hart.
Yeah.
I think that selling an injury or selling some sort of medical emergency after that, I think is probably even in too poor taste for modern wrestling. Mm-hmm. But it absolutely was not in too poor taste for WCW in 98 because that place was a shit show.
All right. So we're just saying it's kind of fascinating how the reality is just too real. Is that how you'd articulate it, or what is it?
Yeah, I think that there are certain things in wrestling we're willing to accept. We're willing to have a suspension of disbelief. Mm-hmm. I think whenever you try to monkey with that too much, and whenever you try to break that relationship you've built up with the wrestling fans, yeah, and especially with someone like Ric Flair, mm-hmm. who everyone just the most beloved figure in wrestling history. Yeah, you're playing with fire.
Mm-hmm. James Walker, man, just really coming in strong and really swaggering here. But I am not the referee. Indeed, Eddie Firth is the referee. But let me kind of sum up Richard and Mike, his former partner, Michael's choices. Big Boss Man, Big Show, Casket Heist, Home Invasion was one that they mentioned too. The ECW Extreme Sandman Raven storyline that just crossed the line. The Nation of Domination and DX storyline, and Ric Flair Heart Attack. So Eddie, Let me ask you, I don't know how much you get to share or which is revealing too much. Before you do your job as a referee here and call the match, what are some things that a referee does that maybe not everybody knows that they do? Is that revealing the curtain too much?
What I'll say is we are essential in communication.
Okay. Fair enough.
We really help performers communicate with themselves, with each other, communicate with the back. I more or less, we're there to support the story. I never want to get in anybody's way. I'm there to effectively finish the match, but it's somebody else's show. I am a bit player. I just make sure I support them in anything that they need. Check on everybody. Really do make sure they're okay. I am, in a very real sense, if somebody were to get hurt in the ring, which happens on occasion, I'm the first point of communication for anything. The other wrestler may find out first, and if they find out first, I'm second. So,
oh wow,
it's a very interesting mix of real things and pretend, make believe things.
Mm-hmm.
Do you happen to have a twin who might also be a referee, who might be evil?
It would be great if I did. We could
screw
tour
over, yeah. Yeah, it'd be incredible.
Not since Twin Doinks has there been.
By the way, the Hebner switch should be on the Mount Rushmore of controversial storylines. They literally introduced an evil twin, and they actually had a twin ready to go. This was not some fake referee. This was somebody who was a real referee and happened to have a twin, and the two of them ultimately switched jobs in real life. So Earl was the bad referee, the evil one, and Dave was the guy who was refereeing all the time. So Earl was the guy who never refereed. He worked in the back, and they're like, well, you're going out and you're going to pretend to be Dave. Like, they switched in real life too. That should be on the Mount Rushmore.
But it was controversial, but it absolutely worked. And sometimes controversial angles can work. One of the ones that I had on my preliminary list that we talked about with Michael was when Jake the Snake Roberts Snake bit Macho Man Randy Savage.
That's top. That has to be towards the top. A snake bit a human. A real snake, a real king cobra bit a real human on the Saturday morning television. That's at least number 2 on the list.
As the referee, you are absolutely allowed to go in and put some of your choices in there. These guys could get 0 points, and it would all be fair in love and war. So if you want to, at this point, award Richard and Michael any points, or award James any points, go for it. We can give away a total of 4. You could choose 2 to give away to the Hebner switch and the snake if you want. So what are your choices?
The Sandman and Raven with the cross is really, really strong, because it did kind of ripple and last as one of those infamous stories. The Ric Flair heart attack did not strike me as a story that's told as often as the rest of them. I know that doesn't count. I say we would pick Shockmaster and Brawl for All, and then DX and the Nation and Sandman and Raven. If we were going to make an ultimate out of those choices, because even though the Shockmaster is what it is, it's one of the most infamous moments in the history of the business. And when you talk about controversy, it creates controversy among fans. Like, it's the number 1 watched thing on YouTube for all of pro wrestling right now. So Shockmaster, Brawl for All, DX and the Nation, and then the Sandman Raven angle where Raven got crucified.
All right.
Sandman got crucified.
Okay, so it looks like that's 2 and 2 for each of these guys. So
yeah.
So it's a tie. Good job, guys. So as we are running out of time, I want to thank again our guest, who is James Walker. James, so awesome, man. Thank you so much for
thanks for having me. It was fun.
We got to get you back on because you're such a knowledgeable dude with cool stuff. So, and I want to thank our guest referee, Eddie Firth. Eddie, do you have anything you want to promote? Any Zoom comedy shows or anything like that? Seems like everybody's out on Zoom these days.
Just check out the Store Horseman podcast on Apple iTunes. It's a bunch of comedians. We talk wrestling every week out of the Comedy Store. we've still been posting them since quarantine. So we just zoom in and follow Historical Roast and Fictional Roast on Instagram. And thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, gentlemen. This was
Thank
a
you,
blast. All right, this has been the Mount Rushmore of controversial wrestling angles. Our guests have been Eddie Firth and James Walker, and of course the schmoes that you know, Michael Winfield and Richard Manfredi. I, as always, am Jeff.
I'm Richard.
Michael
And I'm
gone.
Michael. I'm Michael.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks very much.
Bye.